Hi and welcome back. This is the third part of my series about test-driven iOS development, and in this part we will try to build a view controller that actually fetches the data, or that we can prove that it will fetch the data when the app is finished. And but before we start with this implementation, we first need to clean up a bit from last time. So let's get started. Last time we stopped at this position here. We had a test that tests that our API client does actually fetches some data from URL session. And in this case, a protocol mock we put in there to control in the test. What the problem here is that we have now, we are doing some different things in the test that we planned in the beginning. So the name of the test isn't correct anymore. We have test books should return first book. This is not the case anymore. We test here that should return list. Oh, sorry. This was wrong. Should return a list of books. Well, this is a better name. And what we also didn't do last time is we didn't test the correct URL we are using. So if you remember, we had here, sorry about that, it's also not important. We had this URL we were fetching the data from. This is this URL, and we want to test in our, or figure out in our test that we are actually using this URL. This will be another test, so it will be func test fetch books should fetch from correct URL. And this is again an async throws test, I guess. And we are setting that up as we did before. We are fetching the books. So we just copy what we had here. And we need in our URL session protocol mock the ability to store the URL that was used. So we add here a var URL, or it's better to make sure which of those calls set the URL. So we will do data from delegate. This is just those keywords from this call we are using here, or we are mocking here, or stubbing. Data from delegate, URL argument, something like that. Maybe we get later an idea about a better name, but now we can do it this way, and this will be optional because first it's nil, and only when this call happened we actually set this value, and we can do this here. So data from delegate URL is equal to URL. So we just store the URL we pass into this function here. And now we can go back to our test code, and we want to make sure that the URL used is the one that we expect. And again, we go to this code here, and we say this the expected URL is try xec unwrap URL. We have to use try here because this can fail, and in a test it's always a good idea then to use the try unwrap, because this will lead in the test failure and it wouldn't crash the test. And this is a more useful information for our future selves. Okay, so this is the expected URL, and now we can test that the expected URL assert expected URL is equal to the one we just stored with our URL session protocol mock. So the session mock has now a data from delegate URL argument, and this should be exactly the expected URL. And if we now run the tests with Command U, take some time. It takes too long, I guess. I don't know. Okay, let's see if we can run the application on our simulator. Okay, this works. So there is something wrong with our test. Maybe. Let's see if the test plan still has the option only. Yeah, it should work. Okay, let's try it again. Command U. So I don't know what's going on here. Xcode doesn't like me at the moment. I don't know what's going on. So let's see if we can fix this problem. First of all, let's try to clean the build folder. Second, let's clean the test results. And then run the tests again and see if this fixed our problem. Okay, so it looks better than it looked before. We have fetched books we don't need, we don't use. And now the test runs. Perfect. We have fixed our issue with Xcode. And the test fails. But before we work on this test failure, we first make Xcode happy by telling them we are not interested in the return value of this. I think we don't need the let in this case. Let's run the tests again, see if the failure or the warning disappears. Yeah, the warning is gone, but now we have to actually fix the test. And to do that, we go into API client and we use the API or the correct URL, which is gutendex.com books. And to make it look better, we can do it on different. So looks now. No, wait, I would like to have this on a new line then. So this looks better now. Let's run the tests again and see if this fixes this problem. And it does. Perfect. Okay, so now we have a test that that checks that we use the correct URL and that it uses the book, or that our API client actually fetches something from this URL and uses the book to provide it to the caller of this method. Okay, before we go on, let's see if we can get rid of this book in the second test, because we don't need this book here. We just needed it in the first test that we can fetch something, but what if we replace it with an empty books URL if the test still works? And it works, that's good. So we can remove these two lines. That makes the test shorter. Shorter tests are better tests. And just if we are paranoid, we can test if it still works. So I remove the S from the books in the URL and see if it still tests something. Yeah, it can fail. Look at failure. Here we expected books and we expected book and we got books. So this test still works. So let's run the test again to make it green. It's nicer to work from a green state, even though we know we fixed the test again. Okay, next thing is we need a view controller. There is already one view controller in this project, the view controller the template started with. We could use this one, but I tend to create new view controllers, and if I don't need it anymore, then remove it altogether, because renaming is just, I don't know, sometimes it fails, sometimes, I don't know. It's easier for me to just start with a new view controller, and later on, if I don't use this view controller, then remove this. Okay, so start with a new view controller, and we call that it's a Cocoa Touch class, of course, because we are inheriting from UI view controller. And we want to call that books. Yeah, I don't know, books list maybe, books list view controller. And we create this view controller. And I like to remove everything that comes with the template, just to have a clean slate I can work with. Okay, so what do we want to do with this view controller? First of all, we need a test class for it. So we copy the name, go into our test target, create a new class. It's a unit test case class, and we call it books list view controller tests. Next. This, the location is okay. And here again, setup with error, tear down with error is okay, but we could remove the tests that come with the template. And we have to fix the indentation. So perfect. And what do we want to have? We want to have the ability to create a view controller here. And oh, I forgot something. Sorry. I forgot something. Here we have to clean up a bit. I explain what I mean. We are creating an API client here and an API client here. And we are creating a mock, a session mock here and a session mock here. This is not needed. Well, the session mock is maybe useful because we have a book that we put in here, but still, we can clean that up using some methods in the test case class provided by Xcode. And this is there's a function that's called setup with error. That's a function that can throw. And here we can set up our API client. And what is usually done in test-driven development or in unit testing in general, you might have seen it already, is to call what you are testing SUT. That's short for system under test. And this is what we are doing here. So we create a variable SUT, and this is of type API client. And we will use a forced unwrapped variable here. And you might think, wait, forced unwrapping is bad and you shouldn't do that. And I do agree with you, but in tests, it's not important because this will never fail. And if it fails, it's okay to crash, because then something very basic is broken in our test. So let me show you what I mean. This setup with error method is called before each of those test methods. So it's called before the execution of this test method and then again before the execution of this method. So we can put the creation of the API client into this setup with error code. And this is done like this. Set SUT is equal to API client. And we can also put the mock creation into there. So var, again, a variable, session mock, and this is of type URL session protocol mock. And as we have the setup with error written as that it can throw, we can put all this creation of the session mock in here as well. So we just, oh sorry, I just used something wrong here. So we can, oh, I wanted to move this one here into the creation of the, or into the setup method. And here we do something like this, and the API client isn't there anymore, so it's now called SUT. And with this, we can remove the setup we did in this and in this test. So now we only have the execution and the assertion. When we set up, oh, there's something wrong. Yeah, sure, we have to use SUT here and SUT here. And we use this short form SUT to tell our future self or our colleagues that this is the thing that's under test at the moment, because we also have different things in the test. We could also have different kinds of structs or classes we set up for the test that are not under the test, or that we are not testing at the moment. So we make sure that we understand which of those elements in the test are under test at the moment, are important. And that's why we are using something that's general for all tests, for all our tests. We will use it all the time. And if you look into other people code, you will also see they use it as well. They also use the SUT short for system under test to make sure that you understand what is under test at the moment. And there's another important thing here. When we set up something for a test, we should remove it afterwards or tear it down. And therefore there's a tear down with error method. And there we just redo everything we did before. So we set the session mock to nil and also the SUT to nil. And this is important because how the tests are running in the test runner of Xcode. So when the test runner starts, it creates all those elements it uses for all the tests before even one test is started. Then it runs all the tests and then it removes everything again. So this means you have to provide a proper way to set this up and tear it down afterwards to make sure that you don't have information from one test leaking into another test. This is why it's done this way. And we have to do it with variables because this is not an initializer of our test class. And we can't use an initializer because this test class is only created once for all those tests. But we want to create those things we are testing for each and every test individually. So this is why we can't use an initializer. Well, this is now a way better thing to set that up, and we can try to run the tests to see if it still works. Perfect, it still works. So now we can move to our second test class. We wanted to have a test that makes sure that we fetch the books from the API client, or we use the API client to fetch the books. And for that, again, we use the SUT keyword or SUT name. And this now is a books list view controller. The test, again, doesn't know that it is something like a books list view controller, and that's because we haven't imported our free books target using the testable keyword. Free books. So this should now make, import, I forgot, import. So this should now make the test or the compiler happy, and that's it. So and now we set up, we also assume that we have API client mock. And we expect there to be an API client protocol, and we want to mock of this protocol. Something similar we already did with our URL session protocol mock. So let's create the, no, that's correct. So let's create the protocol first. The protocol it's a good idea because for users of this API client, it's clear what to use there. How and which methods should you use to fetch data from the API, and that's why it's a good idea to have a protocol, and it's also easier to mock than this API client if we have a protocol. So we create an API client protocol, and we put in here the one method we already have written. Very easy. And now we can use this in our, first of all, we can create a protocol mock. And we do this using a Swift file, and we call it API client protocol mock. So now we create a class API client protocol mock, and this inherits, or this conforms to API client. Oh, let's just let the compiler help us by importing testable in a testable way the free books target. Free books, and now we can use the API client protocol, or it helps auto completion, and it will tell us that we are not actually conforming to this, and we can do that by missing return instance. Yeah, we want to, so this, we don't need this. I don't know why Apple is doing, why Xcode is doing that sometimes, to add the target from where this comes from, because it messes all the time with the compiler. So okay, so let's wait a minute. Let me fit a switch on the lights that you can see my face a bit better. I don't know. Maybe it's important, maybe not. Okay, so what we want to have here, we want to be able to provide the caller of this method with some books. So we create a variable here, or a constant, and this is books to return, and this is an array of books. And if we have that, we also need an initializer, and this is, oh, wait a minute, we can return it here first. Books return, books to return. And now it tells us we don't have an initializer, but maybe the compiler can help us to create one. No, it can't, so books to return is of type array of books, and self books to return is books to return. And now that we have this protocol mock, we can use it in our test. We already used this type here, and now the compiler is happy with it, and we can now create one of those with API client mock is equal to API client protocol mock, and we need to provide it with books to return, and this is book. Title is dummy. Oh, wait a minute, we have already one of those. We can just copy it, being lazy here. Okay, now we can fix the indentation. So we now have a mock, and now we can create an SUT of type books list view controller, and we assume there will be initializer that also, where we can also feed in the API client we want to use. So API client is API client mock. The compiler will complain because there is no such initializer, but we can create one. So let's say we have API client of API client protocol of type API client protocol, and there we have the initializer, and we also need to call super init name nil and nil. We use we will do all our layout in code and not using storyboards. So therefore we use this initializer, and it's all working out perfectly. And it's easy to get the dependency we want to use in the test into this view controller. If we don't, if someone uses the init with coder, we just want to return nil. This one. So, and this should make the compiler happy again. And this should also make the compiler here happy again. And as we already did in the last time, we can now use, or we can now remove what we have built up in setup with error using API client protocol mock and setting that to nil, and also setting the SUT to nil. And now we are done. Now we can write our test. And the test will be, so we start with the name for the test. Loading view should fetch books. Oh, wait a minute. We want to fetch. No, it's okay when we fetch it just when the view is loaded, and not every time the view appears on screen. It's okay just to load when the view is loaded. So test loading view should fetch books. And we try not to use async and throw, but we might use it because we have to use it because we are dealing with this with the call to this. No, wait, we don't need it. Sorry, we don't need it because it will be managed in loading in view.load. The error that is thrown and also the asynchronicity will be managed there, so we don't need it at the moment. Okay, so let's build a test that fails. We want to load the view, and this is done in SUT load view if needed. This will call load view, will set up the view, and then it will call view.load. This is everything included in this view.load. So, and you shouldn't call view.load yourself, because setting up a view and loading a view depends on the order, what happens when and how it's set up and all that stuff. You should leave that to your iKit and just use the method that are actually provided to you, like load view if needed. And this is what we are doing here in the test. And what we want to make sure now is that the book collection view, so the book list view controller has a collection view, and that collection view has then as many items as we expect to be loaded. This is a bit difficult to test, and we will first use a very simple version to test that, and later in the next session we will improve how to measure that we actually did load those values, or did load those books. Sorry, that we load those books from the API. But for now, we are just using some trickery. You will see. So when view.load is called, we want to make sure that there's a collection view. And we expect, first of all, that the view, or let's call it a books list view. We expect to have it that the books list view controller has a view that's of type books list view. So we again try XCC unwrap, and we use the SUT view and try to cast it into a books list view. And the compiler will now tell us that this is not possible because there is no such thing as a books list view. So we will go back to our main target and create such a view. UI view, books list view. And here again, we first of all remove everything because we want to build it ourselves. Now the compiler should be happy. Errors thrown from here are not handled. That's true. So we add throws into the test method. And this means when this fails, this unwrap fails or doesn't work because this casting didn't work or something like that, or the view is nil, then it throws an error and the test fails. And when we have the books list view, we expect it to have a collection view. Books list view, collection view. But there is no such thing as a collection view in there, so we have to add it. So we call here that collection view, and this is UI collection view. And I think the normal initializer doesn't work, I guess. Or does it? Not sure. Let's see if the compiler is now happy. Yeah, it is happy. And we have when we have the collection view, we want to get the number of elements in the first section. So what would we call it? Number of items, and this is collection view, and we have to go to the data source for that. Number of items in section, and we use the collection view here again, and the section will be 0. So we ask the collection view, please give us the number of items in section 0. And what's going on here? Yeah, this works. And now we expect, we can now assert something, xcc assert equal number of items, and we expect it to be 1 because there is one book in this return from the API client protocol mock. And now let's run this test. This test fails, and it fails because this is not a book list. We get a books list view we get from here. And this is a perfect place to stop this video, because when we next time come back to our code, we see exactly where we stopped, because we see the failing test. And then we can start immediately working on the failing test and make this test pass. So this is what we are doing now. We are stopping here at the moment. And next time we will fix this test and work further on our view controller to make sure that it actually fetches the books from our API client, or uses the API client to fetch books. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.